On March 12, 2026, Charles Sonny Burton was scheduled to die. After more than 33 years on death row, Alabama was going to execute a 75-year-old man in a wheelchair by nitrogen hypoxia for a murder he didn't commit. Even the state of Alabama acknowledged this. In their own court filing, the Attorney General's office called the situation arguably unjust. They wrote that keeping Sonny on death row while the man who actually pulled the trigger received life without parole created an outcome they couldn't fully defend. But what happened inside that AutoZone in Talladega in 1991 that put a man who never killed anyone on a path to the execution chamber? On August 16, 1991, 6 men gathered at a house in Montgomery, Alabama to plan a robbery. Sonny Burton, who was 40 years old at the time, was among them. After 3 of the men left to get guns, all 6 drove in 2 cars to Talladega. There, they stopped at a car wash and chose their target, an AutoZone automotive store. Before they went inside, Sonny gave clear instructions. He told Luwan McCants, who was just 16 years old at the time, and Dion Long to watch the door. He said that if he left the store, they should forget the whole thing. And he told them if anyone caused trouble inside, to let him handle it. 5 of the 6 men entered the store armed with guns. Larry McCardle, the store manager, later testified that Sonny walked in first, bought a few items, and asked for the restroom. After Sonny headed toward the back, accomplice Derek DeBruce pulled a gun and ordered everyone to get on the floor. Sonny then grabbed the manager at gunpoint and forced him to open the safe. He took the cash. Then he walked out of the store and headed to the getaway car. But what happened next inside that AutoZone changed everything. While the robbery was winding down, a 34-year-old customer named Doug Battle walked through the front door. He was a U.S. Army veteran and a father of 4 children. Luwan told him to get on the floor and hand over his valuables. Doug threw down his wallet and got to the ground, but he and Derek began to argue. Derek hit Doug, knocking him to the floor. Then he shot him in the back. Doug died from that gunshot wound. His youngest daughter, Tori, was just 9 years old at the time. Sonny was already outside when it happened. He later said he didn't even hear the shot. On the drive back to Montgomery, Derek told him someone had been shot. In Sonny's own words, "I said, man, you didn't tell me you done shot someone. I was angry. I was really angry." The 6 men returned to the house and divided the stolen money. But the money wouldn't matter for long because every one of them was about to be arrested. On April 16, 1992, Sonny Burton was convicted of robbery murder under Alabama's felony murder law. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, and the trial court agreed. Derek DeBruce, the man who actually pulled the trigger, was also convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. The other 4 men received vastly different outcomes. Willie Brantley pled guilty to murder and got life. Dion Long pled guilty to felony murder and got 25 years. Andre Jones pled guilty and got life as a habitual offender. And Luwan McCants, who was 16 and testified against both Sonny and Derek, pled guilty to first-degree robbery and got 25 years. 2 men went to death row. One fired the gun, the other was outside by the car. And for years, they lived alongside each other in the same unit at Holman Correctional Facility. Sonny once said he forgave Derek for what happened. "He got me with my life for something stupid that he did," he said, "but I forgave him." But to understand why this execution divided an entire state, you need to know what happened to the actual shooter next. In 2014, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Derek had received ineffective assistance of counsel during the penalty phase of his trial, and his case was sent back for a new sentencing hearing. But the robbery murder had happened 23 years earlier. Witnesses had scattered, evidence had aged, and rather than redo the entire penalty phase, the Talladega County District Attorney agreed to a deal. Derek was resentenced to life without parole and moved off death row. But Sonny stayed. The man who pulled the trigger got life. The man who wasn't even in the building when the shot was fired remained condemned to die. And Alabama knew exactly what they were doing. In a 2015 petition to the U.S. Supreme Court arguing to keep Derek's original death sentence, the Attorney General's office wrote that the situation created an unusual and arguably unjust result, where the ringleader remains on death row while the triggerman does not. They wrote those words themselves, and for the next 11 years, nothing changed. Derek died in prison in December 2020. He never saw freedom, but he didn't die in an execution chamber either. Meanwhile, Sonny was still on death row, and the people who put him there were starting to speak up. 6 of the 8 surviving jurors from Sonny's original 1992 trial signed statements supporting clemency. In a phone interview, juror Priscilla Townsend said she still believes in the death penalty for the worst of the worst, but she no longer sees Sonny as that. She said, "I don't see him as a bad guy anymore. I was young, and I made a poor decision, as he did in his youth." Then came the most unexpected voice of all. Tori Battle, Doug's daughter, the girl who was 9 years old when her father was killed, publicly asked Governor Ivey to spare Sonny's life. "My father, Doug Battle, was many things. He was strong, but he valued peace. He did not believe in revenge," she wrote in a letter. She said executing Sonny would not honor her father's memory and would do nothing for her healing. And she wasn't alone. In December 2025, Sonny's attorneys filed a formal clemency petition with Alabama Governor Kay Ivey. More than 60,000 people signed a petition urging the governor to intervene. Sonny's daughter, Lois Harris, stood outside the governor's mansion holding signs that read, "Save my daddy," and "Clemency for Sonny." You almost never see the prosecution, the jury, and the victim's family all on the same side of a clemency case, but at first, none of it seemed to matter. On February 6, 2026, Governor Kay Ivey announced her decision. She set Sonny's execution date for March 12th. As late as Friday, March 6th, her office repeated that the governor had no plans to grant clemency. Sonny had 6 days left to live. What do you think after hearing all this? Did Sonny Burton deserve the death penalty? Or should he have received life without parole? Let us know in the comments. During his time on death row, Sonny had written a handwritten apology to the Battle family. "I sincerely apologize for participating in the robbery that led to Mr. Battle's murder," he wrote. "I wish there was more that I could do." Now, nobody is claiming Sonny Burton was an innocent man. He had prior convictions in Kentucky for kidnapping, burglary, and armed robbery. And by the time he walked into that AutoZone, he already had a lengthy criminal record. But there's a difference between a man who committed robberies and a man who deserves to be executed for a murder he didn't commit. And while Sonny sat on death row, something happened that would reshape everything about how he saw the world. While Sonny was incarcerated, his wife Carolyn was stabbed to death in 1988, along with a friend, by a man named Larry Green. Larry was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. 35 years later, Larry came up for medical parole. The Alabama Department of Corrections contacted Sonny to ask whether he opposed the release of the man who killed his wife, and Sonny said no. He let him go.
"I know that I had to forgive. I had to close that wound in my heart. And with God's help here, I did. I really forgave myself."
His attorney, Matt Schultz, put it plainly. "You have this cruel irony where Sonny Burton effectively pardoned the man who murdered his wife, and yet the state, admitting that this is arguably unjust, still plans to execute Sonny Burton, who never killed anybody. The man who forgave his wife's killer, the man the other inmates on death row looked up to as a grandfather figure. That's who Alabama was preparing to execute." Sonny Burton was now 75 years old. His rheumatoid arthritis had spread to most of his body. He couldn't move without pain. He couldn't walk without a wheelchair. The state had issued him a padded helmet because he fell so often. And on a medical form in 2024, he wrote 2 words to prison staff: "Help me." On another form in January 2025, he wrote, "I feel misery. Please help." He had been diagnosed with delusional disorder, which Alabama's own Department of Corrections classified as a serious mental illness. Their medical records described him as frail. He could no longer get on his knees to pray, something that mattered deeply to the man who had practiced Islam for more than 50 years. And Alabama scheduled his execution during Ramadan, the holiest month in the Islamic calendar. Sonny once said, "Ramadan means the world to me. It allowed me to clean my soul." And he didn't know if he would live to see the end of it. In one of his final interviews, Sonny said, "I ain't no perfect person, but I ain't killed nobody. I ain't told nobody to kill nobody. I didn't even see it happen, and if I had been there, I'd have tried to stop it." He also said something that stayed with reporters long after the call ended. "I'll never lose hope," he said, "even when I'm sitting in the chair with the mask strapped on my head."
I didn't kill nobody. These are my last words.
On March 12, 2026, Charles Sonny Burton was scheduled to die. That is the man Alabama was preparing to execute on the evening of March 12, 2026. But on Tuesday, March 10th, just 2 days before the scheduled execution, Governor Kay Ivey changed her mind. In a letter to the Alabama Department of Corrections, she wrote, "Charles Burton did not shoot the victim, did not direct the triggerman to shoot the victim, and had already left the store by the time the shooting occurred. Yet, Mr. Burton was set to be executed while DeBruce was allowed to live out his life in prison." She continued, "I cannot proceed in good conscience with the execution of Mr. Burton under such disparate circumstances." The governor commuted Sonny's sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The same sentence the man who actually pulled the trigger received. It was only the second time in her 9 years as governor that she had granted clemency to someone on death row. She had presided over 25 executions before this one. She made clear this was not a pardon. Mr. Burton will not be eligible for parole and will rightfully spend the remainder of his life behind bars for his role in the robbery that led to the murder of Doug Battle, she wrote. He will now receive the same punishment as the triggerman. When the news reached Sonny's family, his daughter Lois Harris broke down. "I'm just so happy, she said through tears. "It's just tears of joy." Charles Sonny Burton is 75 years old. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, but he will not die in an execution chamber. If this case made you think, make sure to subscribe. We cover every execution in the United States.